All right, good afternoon, and welcome to our channel. My name is Jay. I am the owner of Section8Consulting.com, and today we're going to discuss Section 8 applications. Everything you need to know. So you take a career of what I do, and you look at all the conceivable questions that kind of cross your desk in the course of providing casework and other consulting services for those that are applicants or potential applicants, and even landlords have questions. So what I've done is I've comprised some of the most indifferent questions that I've had from clients over the years, and the things that I believe are the most important factors, things that we must consider before we put ink to an application. And in the current times, before we create a login and start completing applications, what we should really consider, what's important, and what should your realistic expectations be in terms of dealing with these applications. So let me educate you guys. So this is for this summer. What we're going to do is back to the basics. Okay, many of you already understand the system to some degree. Those that don't usually end up contacting consultants or other people that deal and specialize in the field of Section 8 and federal programs. And in this case, even if you're experienced and have even survived the adversity of getting a voucher, there's so much to learn that it would probably take decades. I've been at this almost 20 years, over 20 years, 24 this summer. And, there's always more to learn because it keeps changing. So let's get into the applications real quick. And I'm not going to show you an application. We all know what it looks like. There's no reason to bore you with that. So I'm only going to get into the conversation of what's important. Okay. So the first thing to be considered is if you're even considering getting a voucher, the first thing you need to look at is whether or not you're dealing with a housing authority that is having a lottery, or whether or not their application is about preferences. So let's talk about both real quick. A lottery is where they open up, they have vouchers, and they're funded to give out those vouchers to specific subgroups of people. So the first thing we need to understand about subgroups of people is just because the housing authority opens its waiting list doesn't mean that everybody applying is going to be considered important, and they may not even have funding for that specific category of person. What do I mean by that? Let's say a housing authority receives $1 million to give out vouchers to the homeless, $3 million for veterans, $4 million for seniors, another $1.5 million for domestic violence clients. That means that if there were 1,000 people to apply and half of them didn't match any of those funding levels, then they would probably languish on the waiting list for a very long time until that type of funding came in. So that's the first clever deception that many of you don't even realize is happening. You're filling it out thinking you have an equal opportunity, or even that the fact that you're this or you're that, preferences are going to make you up and down a list. Well, if they don't receive specific types of funding to address something that's going on personally with you, then the odds of you getting that voucher are next to zero. So understanding what's preferential is very important. So back to lotteries. Lotteries just means anybody. It's a free-for-all. And it makes no difference who you are, how old, a veteran, whether you're disabled or whatever may be going on. It just means that an algorithm simply chooses random people, whether they're 18 with no problems all the way to 99 with a missing eye, a missing leg, maybe a few teeth, and you get a voucher. Okay. So lotteries are unprejudicial in their behavior to give anybody a voucher with no cause. As long as you're low income, you're good to go. So lotteries, I would sign up on those with a little hope. Okay. Especially if you're in a major city. But I've seen a lot of astonishing results as well. So there's no way to know. Lotteries don't have a number either. So in other words, if they issue a lottery number, there's no number. They're going to make their selection, and then that's done. And then you probably within 90 days, you'll get a call. And if your information is accurate, they're going to choose you. Now, it's different again when we go back to preferences. We talked about the funding. Many housing authorities are going to look at the other things. So in terms of the special preferences, but let's discuss a little bit more about some of these questions are going to affect that. So now we know the difference between a lottery. We know the difference between dealing with a normal application and dealing with the housing authority. And we understand kind of what preferences are. So let's distinguish what are the different types of applications. You guys think one application is all there is. And many times it's not, whether it's paper or you're logging in, creating an account, and then filling out information. There's actually two levels of application. The first is a pre-application. Think of it as like credit. You go down to the dealership and they're going to pre-authorize to see whether or not you're worthy as a candidate. Are you really low income? And so the pre-applications are able to determine certain things without even asking. One, because they're asking about income, they're going to determine your income and whether you qualify that way, bare minimum. Number two, by your address, they're going to determine whether or not you work or live local. And by virtue, which is really clever and tricky, is the fact that they can determine your age because they're going to ask you what your birth date is. So they'll determine whether or not you're 62 and older and a senior. So those are given preferences if you happen to qualify that way. Now, in many circumstances, they may ask about whether you are dealing with some of the big three. The big three and most important things. Now, these may or may not show up, and it changes. Many of you are of the opinion that every housing authority operates the same way and is considering the same thing. That's simply not true. There are over 3,500 different housing authorities. They are from big to small, country town to the metropolitan city. And so when we look at that, their administrative plan determines how they're going to administrate the program and give out vouchers that qualify. I'm going to give a few shout outs real quick because I tend to be long-winded in these videos. So many of you will need to save the video or like it or even subscribe, come back later because I do a lot of talking, but that's to help you understand. Looks like it's BC, good afternoon or good morning. There's absolutely no help in the state of California for DV victims, which means domestic violence. Well, I think that there is, but I don't think it's necessarily easy. Nothing particularly is easy. And so I think that the outcome of domestic violence housing and vouchers is heavily affected by the tremendous number of people, and an overheated market in California may ultimately affect that. Also, what's open to the general public and what I've learned professionally are two different things. So what you may be experiencing in your efforts to get domestic violence or housing and vouchers may be entirely different than what our office would have. Okay. I'm much more efficient than the average human. All right, moving back to applications. So pre-applications may have a few preferences there, but usually they don't. In other words, they may ask whether or not you're homeless or going to become homeless. They may ask you whether you're a domestic violence victim or dealing with other issues related to that. And they may ask about disabilities. Though very rare, most of them are not going to ask about most of that in pre-application. Now, primary, that's when you fill out your qualifier, your pre-application, you've logged in, you give the information. They're determining your income, your age, and your potential household composition, because you're listing all these people that are living with you for those of you that have families. And then those of you that they're considering selecting, they will notify you. And that notification means that at that point, there's a very clear chance, 99%, that they'll likely issue a voucher soon. But they need to verify everything. Is your situation the same? And for many cities around the country, these waiting lists can be decades long. And so what you were doing in your 30s may not be the same in your 60s or your 50s. Okay. And so they're going to relook at your application to make sure everything's up to date and you still qualify. Now, again, I want to express that not every waiting list or lottery is going to last 3 decades. There's plenty of places in the country where waiting lists are less than 6 months if you live in a cornfield. Okay. Let's be honest. Moving on my list, and I had to make me a list because I didn't want to have to sit here and have to think these questions up. So we're going to talk now. We've talked about lotteries. We talked about standard applications with preferences, and we're going to talk about subsidies. A lot of you guys confuse the concept of that. So let's get a little in-depth into that and what it might entail. Subsidies, when you address a low-income property, it is a subsidized property. It means the owners have allocated a certain number of units. So that there's 100 units. They may enter an agreement with HUD in order to get a tax break. And in return, they're going to allocate 50 units and they will subsidize those units. In other words, rather than a client applying with a voucher, they would apply at the building and qualify simply by being low income, and they would receive a subsidy. A subsidy is not a voucher, okay? And so if you qualify for the subsidy and you move into unit number 1, that subsidy is attached to unit number 1. You move out of there, you no longer have a subsidy, and you start all over again. You go out and look for other properties. You start this whole ridiculous process. I don't recommend subsidies unless you, A, really like the property, 2, you're probably pretty old, and 3, you're going to be able to live there till term, till death does you apart, okay? All right, so, we talked a little bit about how funding affects the vouchers and outcomes, and that sometimes the funding they receive, they don't disclose. You're applying, you think you've got a good case, but if actually they don't have the money for domestic violence, or may not have it for the homeless, so funding and how they're funding matters. So that brings us to 2 objective subject matters that people bring up all the time in regards to applications, and that would be Section 811 and Section 202. I get people screaming, well, I called the housing authority. They don't know what Section 811 voucher is because it's not a voucher. Let's talk about taxes, tax code, federal code, Title 24, and Code of Federal Regulation. I'm going to break it down real easy for you guys. It's exasperating, 10,000 codes, okay? 10,000 or more. So subsection 811 of Title 24 Code of Federal Regulations states those that are 18 to 61 or that are disabled may receive a subsidy. In other words, there are properties that receive tax credits, and that they designate the property for those that qualify under Section 811. Now, 811 under the federal code means that that property would be subsidized for those that are 18 to 61 and have a disability. Now, many of you scream about, oh, wait a minute, I've contacted the housing authority. What about Section 202? I'm a senior. Those 62 and older with a disability, again, you're receiving a subsidy, and a subsidized property is not a voucher. And in fact, the subsection speaks more exclusively of how funding is issued than it is actually talking about how a person receives a voucher based on that. So how do you qualify for that? Well, it's simple. When you're filling out your application and you're giving honest answers, if you match the criteria of what they describe in subsection 811 or subsection 202, then by virtue, you have an opportunity where you'll qualify for that subsidy. There's not a voucher that you can apply for that is an 811 or 202. It is a subsidized property with a sub-designation that meets that funding. And if you show up and you qualify as a disabled senior or just a non-senior that is disabled, and that subsidy is designated that way, and you qualify, then you're by virtue receiving that. Okay, so let's dispel that and the applications regarding that. Got to take a hit of coffee here, guys. I know y'all can't tell, but I had a long night. When you own as many cats as I do, and they tend to lay in my hair, under my arms, and I had 5 of them, and they put you in awkward positions, and sometimes you don't sleep very well. And then I've got old Tom, my big Maine Coons. He likes to play around the neighborhood, and then I got fleas popping out my hair in the middle of the night, so I've had a rather tough night. Yes, I do treat all my cats with medical care and for fleas, but you can't stop summertime. Cats, I don't care what kind of super collar you have. If you're a real cat owner and you've got more than 4, you're going to have a flea pop around. I don't care what kind of story you tell the people at church. That's just how shit goes, okay? All right, moving on. So I get a lot of clients that have experienced the new generation of information and technology and privacy wars. So I call them in the 2000s. We have privacy wars. Well, the housing authority requires me to get a driver's license, social security, birth certificate, my private information, even my income tax return. I've got extreme views about that, and I don't want to give out all that information. Let me tell you something. If the housing authority is administrating a federal program, qualifying you for a federal program to receive a voucher, and you tell them, no, you're not going to give that information, then the gambit ends right there. They're not going to give you anything. So if you suffer from paranoia or you have a problem with privacy, you're not going to get past the railroad on the fact that you're going to provide that information, or you're not going to get anywhere, okay? There's just not going to be anything about it. So if you're suffering hard, however, we must keep in consideration to be reasonable when possible. Such as moments, and you're not as paranoid that day, consider the application and give them what's required, okay? if it's possible for you that day. If it's not, wait till another day when you're doing your best. All right, moving on. How you report income and family composition. And now in pre-application, they're asking about family composition. There's a question of what about now? And wait a minute, my situation is likely going to be changing in the next 90 days or 6 months. I get that a lot from clients. So what do you actually should be saying on that application? You know your situation. You're about to win a lawsuit. You're about to get a big $16,000 check from disability because you've won that. So things are going to change. Should I report how my life is now, or should I report what it's going to be in the future? Well, there's two answers to that. In most cases, I would advise that you put your present income. However, if you're applying for a voucher and you don't have a present income, but you know you're going to have an income soon, put an income, because without an income, they're not going to take the application. You're not going to go anywhere with it. In all other circumstances where income may change to be a little bit more or less, then I would say go ahead and just report what's current. The only circumstance where you would want to report more income is when you have none now, which would disqualify you, and then you may have some later. You see my point? So, you guys, if you're struggling with that, you should reach out to my office. I'm happy. We have a 15-minute appointment. I can kind of discuss and see what would be the best option, because I don't want to see any of you disqualify. Again, our office and our company does not charge people to fill out applications. However, if you need advice regarding an application, that is something where, the appointment is appropriate. Okay. All right. And I'm trying not to use the word okay too much because it tends to be one of my fan favorites. Paper application. Look, guys, those of you, let me tell you from experience. We deal with clients. Sometimes we end up rinsing through 20, 30, 40, 50, or even more applications and counties and housing authorities in a single year. And so I got to tell you, when it comes to paper applications, unless your process is usually just a fabulous waste of your time. Okay. If a housing authority can't clearly tell you that A, they're open, 2, what they're offering, and 3, when they're going to probably give you that voucher, then I would just go ahead and skip that and try to address it at a different housing authority. Okay. That is a situation I think that a lot of clients do try to work with, but it ends up being more difficult than you can imagine, because if you're dealing with a small housing authority and they don't even have the capability of having a website, they want you to do a paper application, snail mail there and back, then this whole process, what it's indicating to you is this is going to take a really long time, longer than it ever would, even on a long list. So if housing authorities start with that kind of jazz, forget about it. Okay. Well, you don't have to. You can go on and try it, but I'm going to tell you, I told you so later. So you put in the pre-application, you've been qualified for the primary. So you present the primary. It's going to have preferences built in there, if any, about domestic violence, homelessness, and other factors. That's another thing that I get a lot of questions about. And I got to be honest with you, it really comes down to a whole lot of factors, and I could not professionally address that. But I can tell you something that when it comes to income and family composition, you should always be putting what you believe that you're going to be making about the time you're going to receive that voucher. Same thing with family composition. If you're going through a divorce and you know that you're likely going to be selected for that list in a couple of months, then go ahead and just give them an honest answer. Because if you put 10 people and your household's going to be reduced by half, and you reach there, then you may find that you may have dragged out your case where you may not receive a voucher, because they're going to need another 8 months to figure out how to issue a voucher to somebody that needs in principle, a smaller property. So there's many complexities to consider on how you give a current answer and what your life might be like in a few months or in a few years. So you have to think about that before you answer. So you get to the end stage, and so housing authorities have a wonderful time in doing one thing that kind of shocks most people, and you don't even see it coming. And that's that you applied for the housing choice voucher to receive a voucher, but the housing authority tries to offer you things like project-based or a subsidy. Look, guys, the temptation's real big to accept that jazz. When you see a pre-application and they give a bunch of addresses there, those are buildings they own. The housing authority owns those properties. Now, you see how well they treated you and how badly they talk to people. Now you're asking for them to not only issue you a voucher, okay, or a subsidy, but you're also asking them to be your landlord. That way, if you complain about anything, these are the same people that can put you out of the program. Never indenture yourself. A housing authority, anytime they own these properties, unless you absolutely have to, don't make your housing authority the person that issues both your vouchers and the person that can terminate you from the program. Don't ever do that. You'd be better with having the voucher where you have the choice to pick where you go, and the housing authority has no control necessarily over you. Moving on from there, alternative documentation. Many of you come from the old school. I think even I do a bit, okay? But I think that we need to consider one thing. Just because the housing authority gives you a list of what's required doesn't, what they don't usually disclose is if you don't have some of that, don't throw your hands up and give up, because there are alternatives. You may request an alternative, you may request arbitration. And so don't feel that everything that the housing authority is dictating to you as rules or requirements is an absolute. Absolutes are none in this world. They have to provide alternatives if you don't have it. That'd be like me saying to a homeless person applying for a voucher, "Hey man, we're gonna make it to qualify, but if you don't have a filing cabinet and you're not pulling it down Highway 9, and you don't have all these documents readily available, we're going to disqualify. You're done. We'll purge you. Goodbye. Never think about us again." It doesn't work that way. But if you don't ask, you don't receive. So if you have an impossible list of things the housing authority is requiring of you in terms of documentation, then you'd want to consider asking them for alternatives. If they want to battle you, then you may need somebody additionally to step in that understands how to help you fight to get your rights. And that brings us down to dealing with difficult PHA, public housing authorities and workers. Many of you guys put on a good fight. You do. You really do. You see a problem. You don't like being treated badly. You don't believe that your case is being treated fairly. And there's a lot of other dynamics that go on where people's federal rights are violated. I would tell you that in those circumstances, before you trust a lot of advice across Google that is regenerated by artificial intelligence, poor articles that are written a decade ago about things that simply are not relevant or true to federal rules, get with somebody that has a great deal of experience in the field of Section 8 in federal programs. It doesn't have to be our office or me, but somebody else, if possible, that can walk you through what your rights are, how you can address and deal with issues where you feel that you're being mistreated, harassed, or otherwise being discriminated against. So moving on from that, phone numbers and emails. Look, guys, if you're going to use phone numbers and emails on applications, whether they're pre-applications or primary, you better make damn sure that those numbers and emails are good. Double check that stuff and make sure that you're going to keep that phone line for the next couple of years, because not all waiting lists are going to resolve in 6 months. You go and cancel your number, or you move, or something changes, you better report it to the housing authority. If you don't do that and the housing authority calls you or sends a letter to you and suggests to you that, hey, you know what, we have selected you, now we want to verify your primary application, make sure all this stuff is real, we'll issue a voucher, and you didn't even give them, you've not bothered to change your phone number, email, or a mailing address in a decade, you're going to get purged. They're not even going to bother fooling with you. For those of you mailing in applications, you're mailing in old paper applications, you better have a tracking number, and you better keep that evidence to the end. Housing authorities are notorious for mailing to your last address. There's nothing like waiting 3 years and then find out that they'd already tried to reach out to you, but unfortunately, your mother's flip phone didn't work anymore, and you didn't inform anybody. You changed the number, or maybe you moved hotel rooms or whatever, and it's over with. Here you are thinking you've been sitting on there and your number's about to be popped and pulled. No, it ain't. They already got rid of you. It is absolute responsibility of the client to keep pestering the housing authority on a normal basis in order to see whether or not your information is correct. They're not, let me tell you, a lot of people are living in this magical world of feeling they're privileged. In other words, they can just sit around. I'm going to receive a voucher magically. I don't have to do shit. I don't need to worry about it. It's just going to show up at my door one day. No, it ain't. If you got that kind of thinking that you're going to capably put the housing authority in charge of whether your information is correct, they're going to call and do prayer circles with you, out your fucking mind. You have to stay on top of this Everything regarding federal programs, housing, and vouchers is a difficult process. You are the manager of your own case. You have got to stay on top of that. If your attitude is they're well managed and they're going to do all this for you, you're out your mind. I'm telling you, you're going to have a rude awakening. I just dealt with a couple of clients the other day that somehow think that their cases are going to magically produce a voucher in a week or a month, and others that are complaining they can't even fill out an application. If you're struggling if you can't even log into a housing authority website and fill out your own damn application, then you're in trouble. You really are. Unless you're legally blind or deaf, then you're in trouble. It means you're not even going to be able to survive some of the more harsh parts of the process. If you really need this, it's like an obstacle. Then you've got to put in the time and effort. There's no hand-me-downs, hand-me-outs, free church checks, and all this stuff. You got to put in the work. If you don't put in the work, nothing's going to happen for you. And let me tell you something, about 10% of the cases that I take on, I end up finding out later, these are the type of people, man, don't want to do shit. They're drowning, don't want to do shit to help themselves, and they have wild, unreasonable expectations. And then I just terminate their cases and get rid of them because they're not ready for life. They're still under this delusion because they've got a disability that people give a shit. And I do personally, but in the real world, let's be honest. The people in housing don't give a damn whether you're living, dying, if you're broke, if you're handicapped, you miss them or not. They don't give a shit about none of that. Their only job is to qualify. So I'm trying to prepare you guys before you get the shock of your life. Now, I think most of you that have already in some way had some interaction with housing authorities in these programs understand it is a difficult system. It requires a lot of time, energy, and so on. But if you feel entitled in other things, man, oh man, you're going to be the first one on a yoga mat that gets a free roll of socks at the homeless shelter, because ain't nobody got time to put up with people that think that this is going to be magic unicorns. So I'm sorry to have to put it out that way, but I think we need a dose of reality, because I'm seeing more and more people flood our phone lines with these fantasies of, oh, well, everything's just going to be easy. I thought I was going to get a voucher a week later. I'm like, oh my God, lady, are you really that deluded? There's no voucher on the planet in a month. You'd be lucky to get one in 4 months. All right, guys, now that I've done my moaning and groaning and a dash of reality that we probably not everybody's going to enjoy, that's all right. So I'm going to move on and comment on the comments. Gerald, how do I get a voucher when I'm unemployed and on dialysis? Well, you'd want to address the CES or COC system. For those with no income, you should be seeking out CES or COC system. If you don't understand what that is, I would say reach out to my office, because if you're unequivocally unaware or this is your first time getting involved with Section 8, unless you've got years of time to read through articles, legislation, policies, rules, and learn the hard way, save yourself a whole lot of pain, grief, and stress, and contact an office, whether it's mine or another consultant. Because let me tell you, there's always more than just you putting your name, phone number, address, and income on the application. A lot of you guys think that's all there is to this. There's so many things to be considered. And if you don't consider that, then you simply will be another number among thousands of people that simply do not matter in the system. You'll end up at the bottom of the list, and the more people that enter and apply means the farther down you go, because you thought that, oh, well, all I've got to do is just fill out an application. No, there's more to that, way more. And a lot of you have your whole entire cases and reality hinged on, well, I'm just going to deal with my local housing authority. Well, what if it's not open? What if they have no vouchers? And what if they're not going to open in a decade? Then you need to be looking at other housing authorities around the nation. There's a thing called portability. And if you can convince another housing authority to grant you portability despite you're not living and working there, which happens about 30% of the time, then you just defeated your own problem, if you can do it. But that in itself is a sophisticated process of portability and accommodations. All right, moving on down from there. Aaron, I've been homeless since April of last year. I'm on 3 lists in 3 states. Any advice? Well, man, Aaron, I'll give you a lot of advice. You want to reach out to our office. In terms of this video, I can keep it brief. You know, you're signing up for the wrong thing. Let me be clear. If you guys are homeless, you're out on the streets, you're in a shelter, and you're dealing with housing authority, that's a great thing. That's a great item that you're putting on the stove. You're cooking that dinner. It's going to remain cooking there for a while. Housing authorities are not the fastest. And if you're homeless, there's a whole different system in place to deal with you in a much quicker and faster way. Problem is this video isn't really designed to kind of get too deeply into that, okay? For those that are homeless, there's three different types of vouchers and systems at the federal level that could be approached that could likely issue something in as little as 90 days. That's why I wonder why many of you have spent years on the street, despite me spending 20 years making videos trying to tell you how to get out of that. Oscar got to put a pen to paper. Well, if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. You're brutally honest. It is so important and appreciated. I take no joy in being brutally honest, and I certainly don't want to disturb anybody. But I think that we live in a world where we view everything kind of as a service industry. Guys, let me be very frank. I'm not here to entertain anybody. I'm not here to please or be your maid. And even if you pay for casework and all of us coming to me and suggesting that somehow I paid for this, I expect you to be a circus clown and turn tricks and make me happy and please me each time I call. I don't do that. My only job is to get people vouchers and send you on your way because you've got what you need. It's never to please and all that. I'm not Amazon. I can give a damn whether or not you like me. My only job is to be really good at my job. You see my point? And I think a lot of people have a hard time accepting that. They think that money somehow indentures me to the client. I don't. Because it's just as many people. I'll just refund their money. And then guess what? You've got nothing and you go nowhere. And that, it's not me trying to be a hard line. It's just that we need to separate the concept of what customer. You're not buying a toaster. When you purchase casework from me and I work on your case for 8 months, what you're purchasing is my expertise without your attitude. Okay. I don't want to hear it. I won't put up with it. Trust me. Everybody's different. All right. Amber. But, well, you know what, Amber? I'm having a tough time saying that last name. It sounds a bit Cajun to me, but we'll see if you let me know. Moved from another state to voucher and my 3 sons and only income at the moment of SSDI. I'm familiar with Section 8, but where should I start? Well, Amber, I would say to you, I would start by looking up your housing authorities, both in the county you're in and all the surrounding ones. See which ones are open, see which ones are running lotteries, see which ones are actually going to have open applications for you, and then see what your option could be from there. Because look, guys, if you're traveling down a road that leads off a cliff and the housing authority isn't going to open up to 2036, then you can't sit around and wait for that. If you know that you can drive your car 8 minutes over the county line and the next housing authority and the next county over is going to offer a voucher, then the only thing in your mind should be, can I win that voucher 20 minutes away? And can I convince that housing authority to allow me to move that voucher, to port that voucher back to where I am? That's what you should be thinking. Okay. You shouldn't be thinking, well, shit, I'm going to sit in here and watch as the world turns and I'm going to wait till 2036. Most people ain't got time for that. You want to expedite this process? Let me tell you something. Nothing has ever changed about federal rules. If these housing authorities accept federal funds, it means that they must, when they accept that money to give and qualify you for vouchers, it means that all Americans may be able to apply for all federal programs despite where they work and live. These housing authorities have been singing the song and dance for a long time. Well, you don't live in our state. You don't live in our county. We're not going to do anything. Bullshit. Okay? Let's be frank. Bullshit. They accepted those federal funds. They must make it available to all Americans, even if you don't even live in the nation. Now, maybe you won't get that 3% boost because you don't live in that county, or maybe you won't get an 8% boost because you don't work in that state, but that don't make a damn. Look, when it comes to working and living locally, that represents about 3 to 4% of where you would land on all this. You know what's more important? Even if you live 10 states over and you're saying, hey, give me a voucher, I'm going to move it way back 1,000 miles where I'm at. You know what matters more? Whether you're disabled, you're homeless, you're a senior, you're a veteran. Working and living locally, preferences don't mean jack. I could ice a cake with that. It's about as worthless as it comes. Unless the exception to the rule is when a PHA's administrative plan calls for special funding. If they receive special funding, we never know which ones it is. If they have special funding to address only the local community, which means special use vouchers, then that means you would have to live or work locally. But as far as and a lot of you guys take the advice of the housing authority You'll call them and, hey, man, look, I see y'all are open. How long is the waiting list? And then Sally, which is being paid a nickel an hour, which hates that phone, hates everybody that calls, it will tell you just the way they're trained to do it. How about we tell everybody the list will be 95 years? That way they'll hang up, say a few profanities, and we get rid of them. We can work less for our paycheck today. Don't ever believe the advice of a housing authority. They'll always give you absurd wait times. They'll always give you some ridiculous number that don't even match up to reality. And then you're asking the very people that pretty much don't even like you to start with to teach you things. Let me be clear about PHAs and its employees. They're there and paid to do one thing. What little bit of money they're allowed to keep as to run that PHA or public housing authority, they're not going to spend it coaching or counseling or soothing your feelings. Their only job is to accept your application, process it, and determine whether you qualify. You ringing their telephone and holding them hostage for a half hour with all your questions, they don't have time. They're not paid to do that. That's why you get attitude from a lot of them. Well, let's be honest, that's not the only reason. When you objectively hire a bunch of children that are working at McDonald's at noon, and then you discovered the same little girl that gave you a cheeseburger through the window at McDonald's is now your caseworker, then now you know why you've got attitude and ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance. Because when you pay people like trash to work at a PHA, they're going to act trashy to everybody. Get ready for that, because many of you that are cultured and have had a little bit a taste of the real world, you're going to understand real quickly you enter the gates of hell when you deal with vouchers and employees. Many are nice, they care, but many more are they're just assholes. You'll see that. And if you don't believe me, call 3 housing authorities today, speak to their employees, wish them well, pray for them on the phone, and see whether or not how well that goes for you. See how helpful they're going to be. So again, my job is not to beat up the PHA. I'm just suggesting that after 20 some odd years more doing this, I know exactly how things do play out. All right, moving on. Amber, I should have known Amber. You was from Louisiana. I'm from Baton Rouge. That last name, that's what caught me. That's good to see a native here. All right, Stream Tards. He's settling you up for failure while he fleeces you. Well, Stream, we always expect trolls, and you're definitely one of them. So what we're going to do is just get rid of you permanently. All right. So it looks like we don't have many more questions other than the troll. We get those occasionally. You've got people that wander around. I even have the trolls that wander around and they'll swear they've always got some smart ass thing to say. But the question I always wonder about is the only way you find yourself into a Section 8 video, you'd have to actually start searching. So it means the very person trolling you on the cool really wants a voucher because they ain't got jack. That's the same troll that would act that they're high and mighty. You see how that works out? Being on the cool. We'll see you later, Tards. That's a good last name you've got there. I hope it does you well. It certainly serves the purpose of describing what you are. All right, guys, I've enjoyed making this video. I've also enjoyed trolling a troll. Thankfully, we don't get a lot of those, and anytime, any day. So, for those of you that are struggling with the system or having issues navigating the system, you're welcome to reach out to our office. We're happy to assist you with a number of issues related to federal programs, federal rules. If you feel that you have dealt with issues that are complex in dealing with PHAs, housing authorities, and any of the matters that relate to discrimination and other issues, reach out to us. We try to help you in any way we can. Again, we don't charge per application, stuff like that. It's all just relatively consulting and experience. We have reviews, which you can review and so on. And we're happy to provide any documentation required by any client. For those of you interested in casework to help you kind of navigate the system, let's be honest, many of you are already under stress. You've got a lot to deal with. You're dealing with your health, you're dealing with your children, you're dealing with other things. Casework might be appropriate when you don't have time. But the main thing that I want to express through all of this, whether I'm a company and whether or not I'm giving advice, is simply this. If you have tried all other options, if you've exhausted all possibilities and it still have not yielded any type of result that's desirable to you, then and only then would be good to contact us, okay? We're not a first option. We're a last option when there's no other good options available to you. With that being said, I'm going to address the last few comments here. Gerald, thank you very much for the advice. You're most welcome. Amber, I'll be contacting you today. Well, I look forward to that, Miss Amber. Guys, one last thing. We're going to do more through the basics, but here's the interesting thing about going through the basics again. You can watch 100 videos that talk about pillar 9 applications. How many of those videos did you watch about Section 8 applications went as deep as I went? The difference between a circus clown and a person that's an actual consultant is we're able to address a lot of in-depth questions regarding things that you don't even think exist, problems and other issues and considerations. So while most videos would address that you put your pen to an application, we cover 15 things you would have never even thought of. And those are all things that can affect you in the beginning, middle, and end process when you're dealing with housing authorities. So you fully are able to explore all the different effects of you putting ink to paper or putting an application online. There's so many things to be considered. So I'm going to wish you guys an excellent weekend. I'm going to take me and the cats, and we're going to go roam around out in the field over there because I know they're waiting on me desperately. If you're a pet lover, you'll quite enjoy this channel. I rescue cats, and I have many of them, and many times you'll see them in our videos. In fact, if you look carefully in my chair, you'll see all the new claw holes they put in the chair. Anyways, I'm moving on. Y'all have a great weekend. All right. Bye-bye.